Michigan State football, their win total out in Vegas is just 4.5 wins, but the ceiling, I think, could be doubled. We talk about that, basketball ceiling and floor, NIL, all sorts of stuff. Let's go.
You are Locked On Spartans, your daily podcast on the Michigan State Spartans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of Locked On Spartans is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Spartan friends, Spartan family, Locked On Spartans listeners, thank you all so much for kicking off your week with us here at Locked On Spartans. Your team in green and white 5 days a week, at least for one more week. In June, July, we scaled down to 3 days a week, but right now we're still rocking and rolling every single day. Hope you all had a fantastic Memorial Day weekend, and off we go into the show. And as I do time and time again, I come crawling to you people looking for help or looking for your ideas, saying, hey, any mailbag questions out there, send them on over, Sheehan_sports or LockedOnSpartans@gmail.com. The first mailbag question, well, my goodness gracious, it is simple. It was just 8 words, but whew, it's going to give us a lot to talk about here because MSU Truther wrote in floor and ceiling for MSU football and basketball. So we're going to start with football here. And we're going to start with the ceiling. That's right. We're going to start talking positive here right at the top of this show. We're going to get things started off on the right foot here for this week, guys. The ceiling, despite a 4.5 win total out in FanDuel, out in Vegas, I think the ceiling can be 9 wins. Like 9-3, I think is where Michigan State can top out right now. And there's 2 major reasons why. The first one, the schedule. And before I even start talking about this year's schedule, let's just talk about last year's schedule and the differences with what we got this year. Guys, last year's schedule had 3, arguably 4 scheduled losses. Like games that Michigan State was never going to win in 100 contests. You know, you could play those games 100 times, and it might not be the same result. Like it might not be 49-0 Michigan State every single time they played Michigan last year. But it probably would have been a very lopsided loss, just like, well, the Washington game was always going to end in that result. And the Ohio State game, yeah, that was always going to end that way too. And the 4th game arguably could have been that Penn State game. But yes, just looking at this year, instead of 3 or 4 scheduled losses, guys, there are only 2 right now that I'm calling. Maybe arguably 3, but right now, the Oregon game, look, I'm sorry. I love Michigan State. I bleed green and white. I don't see any possible path Michigan State beats Oregon over in Eugene this year. And then, well, the week that's backing up to it, the Ohio State game too. I don't think that Michigan State is going to be winning those games. Now, am I saying that, hey, yeah, Michigan State is going to beat Michigan, the team that I left off there? No, not necessarily. But I think that the Wolverines do have a lot of question marks. We have seen in the last 5 years, Michigan State win as 21-point underdogs against the Wolverines. So I'm not ready to just close the book on that game yet. But guys, I think that is something worth talking about, is that there's only 2 for sure losses right now as things stand. And I understand that the rosters still aren't completed for any team in college football. But as things stand right now, yeah, I think there's only 2 guaranteed losses. A lot of coin flip games out there, but let's just talk about our 2 favorite months of the upcoming year. September, you got Florida Atlantic, you got Boston College, you have Maryland, you have Prairie View A&M. Go ahead and find that on a map. Anyway, Maryland is the only team of those 4 with a 7+ win total per FanDuel. And I know that what Vegas says isn't the end-all be-all, but that's a good barometer of what the experts think your opponents are going to be this year. Maryland is sitting at 7.5. The other teams, like FAU in Conference USA, is just a 6.5 over/under team. Boston College, right here with our Spartans, just a 4.5 over/under team. And Prairie View A&M, look, Michigan State can take 8 of their scholarship players and the first 3 guys that stumble in from the tailgate, and they should still be able to beat Prairie View A&M. That should not be an issue. Anyway, October's tough. We all know that. But with November They get Indiana, Illinois, Purdue, and Rutgers. 3 of those games are at home. We've talked up and down about this schedule. That was not a lot of world beaters we just rattled off. And Michigan State, yes, not a great season last year, still kept a lot of the roster. Of course, very famously, not all of the roster, but kept a lot of core pieces of that roster. And if you give them competent coaching this year, well, that could be enough just to push them over the rest of the pack of those games we just named. So let's say that you sweep September, you sweep November. Can you get one win of Iowa and Michigan? I think that could be the ceiling. Also, guys, the offense too, this is not the traditional coaching turnover from a regime change. You get the head coach, you get the offensive coordinator, of course, but you also get the quarterback that's following the staff. You get the tight end, the interior offensive lineman. You have a decent veteran wide receiver core right now, a solid running back room. I mean, as if it wasn't good enough with just Nate Carter, they got K'Ron Lynch-Adams, a 1,000-yard rusher over at Massachusetts, and a starting offensive line that I think is fine. Now, let's go to the floor portion of this conversation because I can't get everyone too pumped up. I can't get everyone running to FanDuel right now and placing all their life savings on over 4.5 wins because, well, guys, we also need to look at the other end of the coin here. The floor, I think, is 3 wins. And that is a massive, massive gap. I know that's like pretty much a lame thing for someone like me, a podcast host, to do, is give you that large of a window to shoot between a floor and a ceiling. But really, I think it is going to be that volatile for Michigan State this year. Now, why 3 wins is the floor? Why do I think that's the minimum? That's how bad things could get. Well, if Aiden Childs gets leveled by a moped on Shaw Hall on his way to the opening game against Florida Atlantic, that's probably going to be your season right there. I know Tommy Schuster is as good of a backup as you can get in the portal. Not many kids are going into the portal to play a backup quarterback role, especially as a senior. Michigan State got very fortunate with that, with Tommy Schuster. I think the talent gap between Aiden Childs and Tommy Schuster is quite the drop-off, though. But it's not just a quarterback position, right? It goes much deeper than that. The offensive line, depth. The D word, which is what we've been using all up and down this offseason. One of the concerns, one of the reasons I think Michigan State's win total is at just 4.5, because as good as you feel about the starting offensive line, like Brandon Baldwin, yes, you could talk yourself into him being a solid tackle. Same with Ashton Lepo. You also have Luke Newman, an FCS All-American. He will bump inside play interior. Speaking of interior linemen, Christian Big Dooley Phillips looks solid in the spring game. And then Tanner Miller, a guy that did wonderful things over at Oregon State, okay? Now your backups. Dallas Fincher, guys, is the only one with a single snap of college football experience. Whoa, boy. Now, like I said, the rosters haven't been finalized. Michigan State has 4, 5, maybe 6 more scholarships to work with this portal cycle, but it's slim pickings right now for the offensive line. Nevertheless, it gets thin if any offensive lineman gets hurt. And as we've known the last few years, players can get hurt playing the game of football, especially in East Lansing. It's not been a great time. We saw Jacob Merritt get a lot of run in the spring game with the 1s, the 2s. And guys, if you don't know the name Jacob Merritt, I'm not going to fault you. That's a former walk-on, a guy that's a redshirt sophomore. He has not played a single snap, but that's a guy that could be getting a good amount of run coming up for Michigan State this year. Now, it could be one of 2 things. It could be that, hey, Jacob Merritt, he's going to be one of those feel-good stories, a former walk-on, blossoms as an offensive lineman. Sure, I'm not just going to rule that out that could be the case. Or is the case that, oh my goodness, this is a pretty empty offensive lineman room. And guys, football games are won and lost in the trenches. So let's talk about the defensive line right now. Sure, Jalen Satchel, that's a fine pickup from Old Dominion. Daquan Dowse, a really good pickup from Georgia Tech. Maverick Hansen, he's been here since the John L. Smith era. And then Big Worm Ben Roberts, former 4-star. Like, it's a good mix of experience. Guys that you want to have good careers in the future coming up. But wow, that's been a drop-off from where we were with Derek Harmon and Simeon Barrow. Solid players to where we are right now. Is it a massive drop-off? No, I don't think we just fall off a cliff in the Grand Canyon, but it is noticeable enough. And guys, I also want to mention this about the defensive line. 29 sacks last year. That was middle of the pack for the Big Ten. but there's some context with that number. 10 of those 29 sacks came in the first 2 weeks against Central Michigan, against Richmond. Once it was time to start playing big boys, the pass rush kind of went. You're going to need a pass rush this year. Now, hey, I think that it could. I think Jalen Thompson could be solid. I think Chris Bogle can actually have a really good season under a new system here. So that's why I think between the 9 wins, between the 3 losses, I think Michigan State nets out somewhere at 7-5. I'm going to hit you with a fun fact about teams that have an over-under of 4.5 wins. Then we'll talk a little bit of basketball here in a hot second. But first, need to talk your ears off about FanDuel Sportsbook. That's right, gang. America's #1 sportsbook. And depending on what you like, this could be one of the greatest sports seasons out there. If you like NBA, no kidding, this is a great time of year to get in on the action. NHL too. And guys, if you're like me, PGA golf in full swing, you want to get your wagering action done over at FanDuel, especially if you're a new customer. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. Guys, if you're feeling good about Aiden Childs winning the Heisman this year over at FanDuel, 200-1. How about our basketball team? You want them to win the national title? You like them a lot? 65-1 over at FanDuel. Some great value out there for our Spartans. Again, guys, if you are a new customer, you win a $5 bet. That is $150 in bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. It's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Sorry, it's kind of short-circuited there at the end of that FanDuel ad read. Away we go, though. Hopefully segments 2 and 3 here are going to be a little more smooth than the end of that ad read. Anyway, guys, speaking of win totals, which we talked a lot about in the first segment, and also go ahead and get all those wagering actions done over at FanDuel. But I did some research because I was just wondering, teams that had over-under win totals of 4.5 last year, how did they do? There's only 4 teams in Power 5 that had a 4.5 win total. There are 5 that were less, but we just want to focus on the number 4.5. This is a random stat right now. 3 of those 4 teams, Georgia Tech, Rutgers, West Virginia, they all became bowl eligible last year. The 4th team, Houston, they had over under a 4.5. They only won 4 games. Does that stat mean anything? Very well could or could not. I don't know. Who's to say? But nevertheless, 75% of the teams last year became bowl eligible. So there you go. All right, we're going to talk football here because that is what the question asks, football and basketball. Basketball, we will be a little bit shorter on right now. That's a season that's going to start in the way future, but of course, here in East Lansing, basketball means as much as football or maybe even more so, depending on who you are out there. So basketball for my ceiling, like by year end, now I'm going to go with like where they are in the bracket as far as this goes. 4 seed is where I'm going to go. And that might even be a little low to you guys out there. And maybe even after hearing this, because BartTorvik.com, that's right, finish your drink. We mentioned Bart Torvik while talking basketball. They have Michigan State as the 3rd best Big Ten team, according to their projections, the number 18 team in the country. So in order to get a 4 seed, in theory, I know there's a lot more nuance than this, but you're a top 16 team in the country. They're just on the outside, according to computers. But hey, let's say that Xavier Booker does blossom. He does become this lottery pick talent for Michigan State. Let's say Jeremy Fears is a full go and has a jumper next year. Let's say Jaden Akins can handle that 2 spot. Let's say Frankie Fiddler does translate over from middle of the pack college basketball in Division I to the big boy leagues, right? Let's say that he doesn't skip a beat. Let's say Jaxon Kohler and Carson Cooper, they take marked step forwards. Okay, fine. I could see the vision. This is a team that's playing in the top 20 the entire year, top 4 seed line. Great. Now what the floor is, I don't want to panic, everyone. I don't, because I do not think that this is where they're going to go. All right, I want to say that again. This is not my prediction of the season. This is just where things can bottom out, in my opinion. It's the NIT. Like, it's really like that is how bad things could get. Again, I think it's going to be a 7 or an 8 seed, guys. All right, but you're replacing Tyson Walker. That's 20 points a game. You're replacing Malik Hall. And I know we've all had our opinions on Malik Hall up and down throughout the years, but last year, He was the best, if not the only reliable scorer that you had on the low block. And I know you could score all over a basketball court, but that's one place that you want someone to be at consistently scoring, and I don't know if Michigan State has that yet this year. Maybe with Simon Sapala they do, but how often is he going to be playing? Jeremy Fears, yeah, he's coming off a gunshot to his leg. Pretty important body part if you're a basketball player. Jaden Akins needs to be a shot creator. It's incrementally progressed his 3 years here, but for a guy playing the two, you want someone that can create a shot a little more consistently than he has shown. You have two centers, Jaxon Kohler, Carson Cooper, that combined for 10 plus points just 3 times in 19 games last year. Guys, there's a lot of question marks, and that's why it's as high as a 4 seed, as low as the NIT. Now, me personally, I think it'll be a 7 or an 8 seed. Woohoo, get ready for another one of those seasons. Catch the fever. But hey, prove me wrong out there, guys. Please prove me wrong. I'm begging you. All right, this next question from the mailbag comes from Wolverine Nation. Now, this is someone on Twitter that has busted my chops time and time again, but I got to say, like, this was a fine question. I don't know if they meant it to be a legitimate question or if they wanted to have a snarky tone behind it. I didn't take it that way. Nevertheless, good discussion points coming off of this question. They write in, how will MSU football win if they can't outbid schools in NIL? What will stop the next potential MSU star from transferring if MSU doesn't match NIL bid? Now, I imagine this question stems from like losing Simeon Barrow to Miami, right? Or Derek Harmon to Oregon, or even Geno Vandermark to Alabama, right? Like, those are 3 big names that left to chase a bag, I think it's famously said. Now, Jaden Mangum, I don't rope in that category necessarily. I'm sure he did fine getting paid from Michigan, but I think that was more of a, hey, you made my brother the 4th or 5th string running back. That does not go well with my family. I'm leaving. Screw you guys. Like, I don't think that was all NIL. Anyway, back to the question here. Nevertheless, I think there was a few parts of how Michigan State spent their NIL and why they didn't try as hard to go get Derek Harmon back at Michigan State or Simeon Barrow, or trying to match the offers that were out there from Miami and Oregon. I think a big part of it was setting a precedent that double dipping will not be acceptable here under Jonathan Smith, right? And by that, I mean these guys went ahead in the winter window, shopped their number around, came back to Michigan State and said, hey, this is what other schools are offering me. Michigan State said, great. We're going to go ahead and give you that number, which, by the way, for Derek Harmon's case, and probably Simeon Barrow wasn't too far behind, is one of the, if not the top paid defensive tackle in the conference. Okay. Other players did this. Geno Vandermark did this too. He came in the winter, got paid, came back in the spring and said, hey, rent's due. I would like another pay raise. Jonathan Smith was not going to stand for that. That would be an insane precedent to set in year one. That, hey, you could just leave all willy-nilly, and every single time you do it, that's right. Us here at Michigan State, we're going to make sure that you get paid that second time in a 2 or 3 month span. Now, that's part of establishing culture here and just guidelines as to what you are running here. Now, that's just one part of it, right? Like, I think the other part, too, is knowing that the money right now is better spent elsewhere. Now, this kind of goes back to the first segment where I expect the season to net out 7-5, 6-6. Vegas expects even worse. Like, this isn't a college football playoff season that we're about to embark on in East Lansing. I'm very sorry if that comes off as negative. And if you disagree with me, first of all, I hope you're right. I hope I'm wrong. Second of all, comment below on YouTube or LockedOnSpartans@gmail.com. Nevertheless, if this is going to be a season that at best ends in Nashville and Music City Bowl, do you really want to spend like $700,000 on a defensive tackle? Or is that money spent better between like 2 or 3 other kids that are here for the future, or that can help out at other needs? Because, hey, defensive line isn't the only position on the football field. You also have a cornerback room that has been suffering for the better part of 3 or 4 years here in East Lansing. You need help there. I think some of that money that they could have spent on Derek Harmon was divvied up with a Nikai Martinez, a safety out of University of Central Florida, an Ed Woods, a guy that was going to start for Arizona State this year, a Legend Cavazos. So I think it was being smarter with the money, spreading it around. Now, if MSU was set to go on like a 10-2 season, and that the difference between that was spending that big for a defensive tackle like Derek Harmon, you know what? They probably do it, and I'm probably on here saying, why the hell didn't you spend all that money? I think it makes sense right now, as Michigan State is in a rebuild right now, to kind of be more smart. So yes, if it was a gangbusters, win now year, go for it. Maybe try to match whatever Oregon's shelling out, or Miami, maybe let them double dip. But as far as establishing how you're going to run things in NIL and also roster building early on, I think that's kind of where things are at. Now, I do want to remind people that NIL at Michigan State is still fine. I'm not saying that, we're oil barons and it's an unlimited dollar amount that Michigan State has. I think they're like a tier 2 team, knowing what I know. But ask Aiden Childs if he thinks that Michigan State has an NIL problem. I think he'll be doing okay this year. Or like the other guys that followed them from Oregon State, like Jack Valiant, or even Jordan Hall, a guy that probably heard from dozens of programs in the offseason trying to pull him away, and yet he never wavered after that winter window. So, which he never even dove into, actually. So I didn't come to think of it. So I think NIL at MSU is fine right now. I know that guys going elsewhere, getting poached by other schools for bigger dollar amounts, looks kind of like odd and maybe scary for Michigan State. But I think it's just, the fact of the matter of Jonathan Smith, it's year one. He wants to establish what he wants to. And also he sees a lot of holes on the roster that money can be allocated towards. Could be wrong, but I've got a hunch that that's kind of where we're heading right now. And speaking of Wolverine Nation, we're going to start, we're going to keep going here with a mailbag question about the Michigan game coming up. Spartan Strawn, Jonathan Smith enthusiast, writes in, what do you think our chances look like against Michigan this year? And we just talked in the first segment that, I don't think it's going to be a sure thing 100% boat race for Michigan again this year. I think that there will be a slight chance Michigan State wins. That's not what the computers are saying, though. Good old S&P Plus out there. They have Michigan State right now as a smooth, hope you're sitting down for this one, State fans, 34.9 underdog against Michigan this year. Now, of course, that game will be on the road. Of course, Michigan State's the reigning national champs. Of course, Michigan State is in a rebuild in year one. All that can be true, but my God, that seems a little much, doesn't it? And these could be famous last words. Hopefully this doesn't get clipped up and posted after Michigan State does lose 35-0 if that does happen. But nevertheless, Michigan lost a lot of talent off last year's team. There was a reason they were the undisputed national champs, right? And it goes more than knowing what every team was going to run every single play. They actually had good players too. I think we can all admit that, even as the most ardent State fans out there. But my God, that's a lot to replace, right? Especially the quarterback. And right now they have 4 options at quarterback. And the old saying, if you have 4 quarterbacks, do you have one? And right now, the leader in the clubhouse seems to be a guy that has played 2 years at quarterback, granted, under a backup role, a wildcat role, that has attempted no passes so far. So he was such a great decoy as a wildcat quarterback for Michigan. They never even trusted him to throw the ball. Not even once, not even as a fun little gag or a trick play. So that's what's going on there. But with that said, a nice reality check. I'm not saying that this is going to be a coin toss game, guys, because with that said, sure, they have a quarterback that, might not even be able to throw a ball. Will Michigan have to throw the ball, though? Because just like we said, this is why the floor is a little low. We have a lot of questions on the defensive line right now. Michigan will be solid enough in the run game, even after replacing some key offensive linemen, Blake Corum. They'll still be a solid team. And I would be remiss if I did not mention this part. For Michigan State, this will also be at the tail end of the Ohio State, Oregon, and Iowa gauntlet. So we'll see what Michigan State even looks like after that stretch of games. So to answer your question here, what do you think our chances look like against Michigan this year? Oh, God, 8.1% chance of winning that game. How's that one? I almost said 5, but we're just going to nudge that up to 8. Again, we're trying to start this week on a good note here. All right, so this is a big question. from Greg Waddell of Sleepers Media, one of my favorite people to listen to, one of my favorite people to talk with when we have him on the show. Him, Carter Elliott, do fantastic work over there. And he wrote in a fantastic question that, honest to God, I've changed my answer 5 times even during show prep. So here we go, guys. He says, you have to choose one of the following 2 outcomes. Which one do you choose? Number 1, MSU football wins a natty this season and basketball promptly misses the tournament for the next decade. Or number 2, MSU b-ball wins a natty this season and football promptly goes 3-9 for the next decade. At this very moment right now. God, I've really flip-flopped because, man, football would be so cool. Obviously, like, that's the sport that most people care about nationally. Like, that's bigger than basketball. That's what brings in the eyeballs, the money, nevertheless. And that'd just be so hilarious just to win a natty right after Michigan does, and we get that whole chip on our shoulder that says, that's right, we got the last one, not you guys. Oh, my God. But, man, as much as this guy has driven me crazy the last few years, as much as I don't really entirely agree with the offseason strategy with the center position, give me Izzo second. Because, dang it, just like that family member that drives you absolutely bananas time and time again, we still love that person like a family member because they are a family member. So, yes, Tom Izzo, give me his second natty, cut down the nets. I want to see that man retire happy, fulfilled, and I think that comes with a second national championship and also 3-9 football seasons. I gotta say, like, we've done that. So, like, what's a few more? What's a decade more of those if that means that Tom Izzo is cutting more nets down? Like, that's where I'm at right now. If I could very well wake up tomorrow morning and say, oh, man, how sick would that be for Jonathan Smith in year 1 of what I've been calling a rebuild to just win the natty? Like, oh, my goodness. I would be on the local news leading off the show that night after all the carnage I would just make inside of my own house. It would be quite the spectacle here. All right, guys, we are going to get to 2 more questions. Yeah, maybe 3. We'll see. Jack writes in, prediction on what Michigan State's overall will be in the new college football 2025 video game coming out. Now, almost a decade ago, NCAA football 2014 was the last game to come out. Michigan State, of course, that was in the midst of their golden age, right? They were a 91 overall. So with that, and that was like upper tier, obviously. Alabama was a 99, Ohio State was a 95. That's where it was. Like, Michigan State was not too far behind that. Right now, I think it'll be middle of the pack, where Michigan State is right now as a program. Now, when NCAA football 2028 comes out, like, could they be back up to that 91 overall rating? Sure, very well could be. I'm very high on Jonathan Smith. I love the hire. I love the way he can rebuild a program. But right now, I think it's going to be a smooth 82. Like, middle of the pack for Power 4. Like, I like a fun team to play with, obviously, right? You got Aiden Childs. That's going to be a sizzling quarterback to play with. But I think right now, 82. I'm also not a video game expert, so I'm going to out myself as that. Now, this is the question that I've been waiting to get to right now. This is from Rachel, who always comes in with great mailbag questions. This is, folks, what is the summer 2024's signature cocktail / beverage? Now, I've thought long and hard about this because I may have just found it over this Memorial Day weekend. But we're keeping it simple. We're keeping it 2 ingredients, maybe 3 if you want some flavor. But, guys, we're limiting the carbonation. We're limiting the sweetness in drinks. Sure, we'll have the occasional White Claw. We'll have the occasional High Noon. We'll have the occasional beer. Let's not get it twisted here. But I think that this is going to be the summer of vodka iced tea. Vodka iced tea is going to hit on a boat, on a golf course, on a campfire, in a job interview, at a funeral, at a wedding, wherever you are at this summer. I think I'm making this the summer of vodka iced tea. All right, so there is my summer 2024 signature drink. It's very boring. Usually I give you like a Tom Collins or something like that, or some craft beer that's very fancy. No. Just vodka and iced tea. I'm going to be pounding some of those in some weekends this upcoming summer. I'll get to one more question. And again, like, who could possibly care about this answer? But whatever. We're going to go for it. Professor writes in, What is your favorite Michigan golf course that you feel comfortable teeing off on? And what's your favorite that is significantly out of your league? I love this question. This is for my Metro Detroit golfers here. My most comfortable golf course, Sanctuary Lake. That's right, built on top of a landfill. But I don't play like I'm from a landfill when I tee off on that course. Maybe it's because I've played it like dozens, if not more than 100 times in my life. Been very lucky. That was a summer job that I had at their sister course, Sylvan Glen. That was one of the perks. You get to golf at both those courses for free in your off time. So Sanctuary Lake, not a lot of trees. My tee shots could use that because I got myself into Rikers Island more times than not this weekend, playing at a course with a lot of trees, a lot of penalty strokes right off the bat. Not at Sanctuary Lake. Most uncomfortable course, Arcadia Bluffs South Course. My goodness gracious, that's the best I've ever felt about a 95 in my entire life. But the most baffling one, and this is just story time with Matt, and maybe you guys can relate out there. Maybe you have a course like this. But there's a course in the west side of the state. It's called Lake Monterey Golf Course, right outside of Sandy Pines. It's a nice little vacation resort out there. It's a course that I kind of grew up on. It doesn't even tip out at more than 5,100 yards, right? Like, this is a very short course. It's municipal. You see more people golf barefoot than you do in polos. Like, this should be a course that anyone can tear up. But my God, like, I just revert back to my 7, 8, 9-year-old self learning the game of golf, and I just golf like a loser when I'm out there. Duffing tee shots, topping balls, chunking wedges. Like, it should be the most comfortable course that I know because A, it's very easy, and B, I've played it, probably dozens and dozens of times, but every single time I step on that course, I just turn into a pumpkin. It is a scene in Space Jam where I put my hand on the ball and all my golf talent, the very little that I have, is sucked out of me. But maybe you guys have a course like that too, where no matter how many times you play it, you still just turn into ridiculous golfer. Sorry, I'm just checking the comments right now on YouTube. We're doing a live show. JJ Runyon writes in Merritt. Don't mean cock slam. That's right. There we go. I love that. Johnny Cock Slam. If you know that reference, congratulations. You're online way too much. And if you don't, well, just ask me about it later. All right, guys. Really do appreciate you all watching, you all listening. Love you all. Let's have a great week. Go Green.